I'm Susan Mulholland, and welcome to Artbeat. Tonight we'll be visiting the Arts Recipient Award winner, Charles Wells. Next we'll visit Michael Berenstain, who's an illustrator and son of Jan and Stan Berenstain. And finally, a return visit with Raymond Granville Barger to find out where his sculpture Transition will be permanently located.
Well, the piece I'm working on now, I don't know which came first, the block or the thought, but I'll start with the thought. I had the thought suddenly I wanted to do a Daphne figure, a figure of a woman turning into a tree, because I wanted to have arms and legs and head emerging from leaves, from a rather flat, formal bank of leaves, patterned leaves, very simple, abstract leaves. And I had that image in mind, but since I've been into the piece and carving it, I've kind of changed my idea. I want to make it flatter and simpler, and I don't want leaves at all. I want a flat plane, because as I did with this piece, this walnut piece here, I just had the figure coming out of an absolute flat board, just so it's half in relief and half jutting out. And so I've been simplifying it a lot. I've been making wood carvings that hang on the wall, or that are really very frontal. Part of it's practical, because the old German wood carving technique was to hollow out the lime wood statues so that it wouldn't crack, it wouldn't check, and it makes it quite stable. They'd cut out the heartwood of it. And I started doing that because I had a problem with the checking. It was checking more than I wanted it. Checking means cracking. More than I wanted. It became intrusive, although a certain amount of cracks can be used and can be nice. So I tend now, as a general rule, to split a trunk in half and then rough out the piece I want to do, and then carve out from behind and hollow it out as fast as I can to get the moisture out. Because where you get in trouble is when the outside is drying and the inside still holds moisture, so the outside will shrink and it will crack. And if I can get in quickly, sometimes I drill in where I know there's, if there's a head or something, I'll drill right in there from the back just to let it start drying from the inside also. I think back to the time when I began carving, and I guess it started with working with Leonard Baskin. I'd gone up to him to learn how to draw, just to learn the basics of art, and gradually got pulled in to drawing with pen and ink, very detailed drawings, and got into etching, sort of the arcane mysteries of etching and engraving. And then in the process of etching, there's always a time you put your etched plate into the nitric acid, and you have to wait a certain amount of time while it bubbles and fizzes, and there's not much to do except to brush the bubbles away. And there happen to be blocks of stone, half-finished carvings that students at Smith College, where I was working, had left. So I took to improving them and diminishing their substance somewhat while I was waiting for the plates to etch. And I took to that. And not just for aesthetic reasons. I think almost the basic reason was the delightful combination of the brutally physical and intellectual. Carving, you can really smash into a piece of stone. You can really bang on it. And then it goes all the way, the transition from that, all the way to just fine little delicate work and thoughtful work. It's quite delightful. sculpture certainly is a touchable thing. You think of it as being touchable. I don't know, in a gallery scene, I can hardly even think of what sculpture is in that sense. Certain things, I mean, that's a very artificial conception of a gallery scene. Certain pieces seem to improve from the touching. You see a lot of Romanesque lions in front of cathedrals in Italy where they've been handled. As the people walk in and the patina is just gorgeous, it's lovely. On the other hand, if somebody has a perfect white carving, abstract marble carving, I guess it would just get dirty in a way. I don't know. Some things profit from being touched and some don't seem to. It usually doesn't hurt wood. It's usually rather nice. It feels nice. Wood feels nice. And I think quite often the oil from the hands is good for either wood or stone, except for certain types of finishes of stone. But then often that's a rather precious thing, and maybe it's good to muss it up a bit. I don't know. I first went to Italy in, I guess it was '64. I had a prix de Rome, and they set you up with a lavish studio, and they feed you. It's wonderful, and give you travel money, and just encourage you to work and go look, and give you a fund for tools and things. And so when I first went over there, when I won the prize, Baskin had kind of teased me that I'd get over there and get seduced by all the cheap foundries, cheap in the sense of inexpensive foundries, and I'd start doing bronzes, and I'd give up carving, you know, the true profession. And so to avoid this, I went out to Tivoli, to the travertine quarries, and bought a huge block of travertine. I don't know how many tons it was. It's 2 meters high by a meter, and had this colossal truck delivered it to my studio and dumped it down. And I spent the whole first year of my fellowship carving this massive thing. I broke many tools. I'd had no real indoctrination into stone carving. I didn't know much about the tools. I'd just done a little bit in Northampton under Baskin, and he didn't know much about stone carving tools, and I just picked up what was lying around. Working on this huge piece at the American Academy, I'd constantly go out to hardware stores and buy these points and then break them, I'd bury them in the stone piece, and then they'd snap off. So finally, the next summer, I went up to Carrara and spent a month or two in one of the marble shops there, and just watched how they did things, and that made all the difference. I knew what tools to get, how to use them. And in those days in Italy, you could find a blacksmith around who would, in any town, that knew how to make marble tools for you. Carrara is the name you hear about, and it's a marvelous town, and sort of the greatest marble quarries in the world are in the range of mountains surrounding it. And I worked there for a spell, and then when I came back and I wanted to live in the area, I could only house I could find was down a little bit south, and we got a house near Pietrasanta, which really is a bigger artist town. It's since become quite a center for international sculptors, because they have 6 or 7 or 8 bronze foundries, and then they have all these marble quarries, and then they import marble and granite and stone from all over the world, so you can get anything you want. And as a matter of fact, the place where we lived is just across the valley from a mountain called Mount Altissimo that was owned by the Medicis. And when the Medicis wanted to get in the marble business, and they wanted to know if their mountain had marble, they sent Michelangelo out there to investigate, and he, sure enough, of course, found, I mean, all the mountains there are full of marble, so he found some wonderful quarries, and he engineered and built the road and opened up the quarry there. This piece has an interesting story. This is what they call d'Hervillers. This is the finest Carrara white marble. And this arrived at my studio in Pietrasanta in a lap of a friend of mine on a Vespa motor scooter. And it was considerably bigger, as you could imagine, and heavy. You know, probably weighed 150 to 200 pounds, and coming down in this friend's lap as he came down the lane was a sight to behold, this tottering motor scooter. And he said, "I have a present for you." He was often bringing me presents, and he lived up near Carrara, up in the mountains, in the quarries. And It's not easy to find now, the d'Hervillers, the finest Carrara marble. The little pockets of it, I guess, are getting played out. But so it was quite a treasure to have, and I worked on it sometime afterwards, a month or two afterward. In fact, I was enjoying at the time the contrast between the rough, the smooth, the rippled effect of drapery, and then the rough work where the points lift the marble, very jagged, and then smooth textures of the skin. I just found that intriguing. I always have. I've never sold much sculpture either here in Bucks County. I don't think I've sold anything, or in Europe. In Europe I was selling etchings mostly, but my sculpture's always been routed through New York City. Now I'm not absolutely sure that's because New York is the great marketplace, or just because I'm a creature of habit and I got started with galleries there and I just go on there. This walnut piece I've just finished, or almost finished, I'm still sanding it a bit, it came from Lambertville. It was growing, the tree was growing right next to the house of a friend of mine, actually Linda, whom I sing with. And Linda had this tree that was, growing and starting to push against her kitchen, so she was going to have it taken down and offered the wood to me. And of course I accepted, and we gave instructions to the people that were going to take the tree down to leave in the base of the trunk, leave some good 5-6 foot sections, so I'd have substantial pieces to carve. And of course they chopped it all up in firewood lengths, because that's what they do. So I loaded the wood and brought it back here, and at some point I got the idea of fitting together a piece and making kind of dowels, and thought it would be quite interesting. I didn't know if it would add or subtract to the feeling of the whole piece, and I found it, I didn't know if I'd have to disguise it or emphasize it or what I'd do, these different sections. So I just went ahead and made it, and found that I didn't have to do either. I could just fit it nicely, and it looked marvelous with these horizontal lines, like drums in a column when they stack them one on top of the other. It's a nice feeling of substance and workmanship, I think. And one part of it, the bottom piece on this must have been about shoulder high, and it was right next to a house. And I'd always been told that trees next to a house are always full of nails, and it just devastated my big gouge. It kept I keep running into huge nails and screws and hooks for hanging laundry and things. I got so that in the end, when I was doing it, I'd go over it with a magnet very carefully before I carve in.
You see, this tree is not too small. It has plenty of room. It has plenty of room, but what a view. This tree is too tall. It is not a good treehouse tree. Look here. This tree is more your size. It is not too small or too tall. Yes, it is more of my size, but there's one thing...
Michael Berenstain is sharing one of his new books with his children, from whom he gets many of his ideas and much of his toughest criticism. Michael tells us how he felt growing up in the famous family of Jan and Stan Berenstain, who produced the Berenstain Bear series of children's books, which most of us have read or have had read to us.
Well, growing up in the family that produced the Berenstain Bears was, at the time, as a kid, I always wondered why their parents went off to work in the home like mine did. And as far as their being famous, never really entered into it, because actually when I was they weren't well known for the Bears yet. They didn't come along till I was maybe 8. When I was very young, known for their magazine feature called It's All in the Family. It was way back to when I was a baby. And their names weren't particularly well known. The features do that cartoon feature. So it was pretty normal to me, and it was never struck me as an odd thing when I was young.
Many of the artists we've interviewed have attended
To two art schools. I first went to study to be an artist to what was then the Philadelphia College of Art. It's now, I think, called the University of Arts down at Broad and Pine. I studied mainly painting and also some illustration. And then I transferred for a year to the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts, where I studied painting. So I went back and forth between painting and illustration, and then finally settled when I got out of art school on illustration. I think the basis of my art training really was directly from my parents when I was in high school, because they came from out of the old, you might call the Beaux-Arts tradition. Their teachers were trained in the late 19th and early 20th century. And my parents learned that tradition. It's gone now. It was thrown out of the art schools in the 50s and the 60s. So I was able to get some of that directly from my parents. It's sort of a missing link, you might say. So that was a very important aspect of having them for parents.
Michael explains the steps in producing a book.
Well, in putting a book together, the first step really for what I do are what we'd call picture books. It would be different for books for different age kids, but for young kids, picture books, the first step that I do is really, aside from coming up with a concept of what the book's going to be about, I do an outline of the content of the book. If I were doing a book like these books about dinosaurs I'm doing, let's say it was going to be a book about the Tyrannosaurus rex, I'd simply write down like a list almost. First it would be a section about dinosaurs in general, then a section about the meat-eating dinosaurs, and the biggest one was the Tyrannosaurus. I'd simply go through the whole text that way and make notes about the content. Then I would start to do the rough stages of laying out the book. I would make a lot of really squares on paper, almost like a storyboard of spreads. That's 2 pages when you open up the book. And I would simply make little marks to indicate how big a picture would be, where the text would go, how much text should be on a particular page. Then once I had done that, and make notes about where the content was going to be, what each spread was going to have, then I would go back and actually write a manuscript, the actual text, rough text of the book. The next step would be to make a rough layout of the book, full size. I would, again, do spreads and do a very rough drawing of what I thought should go in a particular place. Then I would do a finished pencil version, what's called a dummy version, where you do very careful pencil drawings with the text typed up and put in place as it would actually appear in the book. That would then be submitted to the publisher. The editor and art director would go over it, make corrections, changes, and once that was all settled, then I would trace the pencil version onto illustration board and then do the finished artwork on that, which would then actually be sent to the publisher to be printed.
2 new series are soon going to be out under Michael's name as author and illustrator.
My new series of books is called I Love Dinosaurs, and the reason I chose to do books about dinosaurs is because children love dinosaurs. I did a book called The Day of the Dinosaur with my parents. They wrote it and I illustrated it, and it got such a terrific response that I realized that kids really want more books about dinosaurs. So this series is about, instead of just one book about all dinosaurs, it's several books about different dinosaurs, one book about the Tyrannosaurus, one about the Triceratops, and so on. And I've discovered in talking to kids about dinosaurs that they have specific reasons why they're so fascinated with them. Kids, especially at a young age of 4, 5, 6, they like scary things. They like big, powerful things that they can identify with because they're so small and helpless and weak. So they want to identify with things that they can sort of partake of their power. Monsters and giant machinery. Kids are, my son Sammy adores gigantic trucks and trains and planes. It's the same kind of thing. But at that young age, I think that things that are too scary is too much for them. Dinosaurs have the advantage for young children that while they're real and big and scary, they're all dead, and they're extremely dead. They've been dead for 65 million years at least. And children, they find that immensely appealing. I've talked to kids who would say things like, "Are you going to tell us about dinosaurs?" And I'd say, "Yes, I am." And they'd say, "They used to live right around here." But then they'd start to look a little scared, and they'd reassure themselves by saying, "But they're all dead now." So a dinosaur for a child is scary, but it's a very safe thrill for a young child. I have another series of books that I'm working on now. The first one will be out in the summer, called The Panda Club. And this is, you might say, the other side of the coin from dinosaurs. This is, instead of the large and fearsome, it's the cute and furry. Young children, of course, need cute, furry, appealing things. And this is a group of cute animals, a panda family, a mother, father, a big sister named Polly, and a little brother called Little Panda, who have friends. And their friends are the Panda Club. They have a clubhouse, which is up in a tree. And the other members are a monkey named Monkey Max, a tiger named Tiger Ann, and a fox named Rusty. And they have a series of adventures. And the first book is called The Panda Club's Treehouse, where they build a treehouse. Wait, this tree is not too small or too tall. It is not too bendy, not too old. It does not have bees or make me sneeze. This tree is a good treehouse tree.
In one of our past shows, I interviewed Raymond Barger in a warehouse where his sculpture Transition was hidden. It had just been transported from New York City, its home for the past 24 years. Transition was recently put in place at the James Michener Art Center in Doylestown, Pennsylvania, due to the efforts of many interested art patrons. The celebration began outside on a gorgeous evening with remarks by Herman Silverman, president of the Board of Trustees.
And we're so lucky that he was a part of Bucks County and thought of us to the point where he singled us out rather than the Metropolitan Museum or rather than the Guggenheim or one of those other museums that would have been glad to grab this, but he singled us out. He said, "I wanted to be where my home was and my happy years were." And Ray, I would like you to come up here and just say hello and do what you're supposed to do. He's going to do it too.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I'm happy to be here. I'm happy for this occasion. And if you want to know why it's called Transition, I'll tell you. I made it soft underneath the curves like the people.
Raymond recited his poem Transition with even more flourish than when we had heard him.
Word war eliminate. Then cast out the word hate. This message of peace transmitted. 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 Let our unborn survive. Let our youth stay alive. Coexist on earth. Committed. Committed. Committed, committed. Thank you.
Thank you, Thanks, Ray. Thank you very much.
The Bucks County Commissioners did the unveiling.
It took an hour to unveil the totem pole at the community college. I hope we can do it in a lot less time. Thank you. Yeah, just to the pole.
"58 people had chosen the current site of the sculpture by entering a contest, but only one was honored with a commemorative poster. Here we see Linda Bucke, director of the James Michener Art Center, Raymond, and the winner. Congratulations,
Thank
you're one
you
of the
very much.
winners.
Thank you. Quite a surprise.
How did you come up with this site?
Well, I don't know. Actually, it was my third choice, and as I talked with my wife, I had it on Pine Street to start, and then I got to thinking about Jimmy Michener and how Doylestown is trying to bring him back, and then trying to tie these buildings together. I thought this would be a good place to sort of combine everything together, and I chose this, and of course several other people did also, and I happen to be the lucky winner.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
Feeling you have that it's finally in place here at...
I like it there. Now, there's going to be a walk coming up all the way here, and a walk here, because you should be able to get under it and look up. And it's going to be the same sort as the tile up here and the tiles all around.
So you feel at that point it will be the way you want it?
Uh-huh. It's a great beginning for the Art Center to start with a major acquisition for the sculpture collection, and I think Raymond Barger's piece is absolutely magnificent. It's something that will enhance the collection for many years in the future.
We hope you'll pay a visit to Transition in its new home, that you'll pick up a book by Michael Berenstain, and that you'll always enjoy the work of Charles Wells. This is Susan Mulholland saying good night for Artbeat.